Good evening and welcome to Columbia Law School. My name is Michael Gerard. I'm a member of the faculty here. I teach environmental law, energy law, and climate change law, and direct the Sabin Center for Climate Change Law. Tonight's program is co-sponsored by the Sabin Center, the Earth Institute of Columbia University, the Columbia Center on Sustainable Investment, the Environmental Law Clinic, and the Environmental Law Society, and it is generously supported by the David Sive Memorial Fund. Almost every week there is a new study showing that global temperatures are on a dangerous trajectory and that during the lifetimes of today's university students, catastrophic climate change is likely. There's also agreement by the overwhelming majority of climate scientists, including those here at Columbia University, that this is mostly a result of greenhouse gas emissions from human activities. About 80% of the greenhouse gas emissions are caused by the combustion of fossil fuels. In the last few years, there's been growing pressure on universities, pension funds, foundations, and other nonprofit entities with large investment portfolios to divest from fossil fuel companies. Some universities and funds have decided to divest. Some have not. Columbia University has not taken a position on this issue, but it is actively considering what position to take. And the president of the university, Lee Bollinger, is here on the front row to listen to what everyone has to say. In November of 2012, students here formed a group called Barnard Columbia Divest that is pressing Columbia University and Barnard College for greater transparency in their investment policies and practices, and is urging them to divest their endowments from the fossil fuel industry. It conducted a poll in which 73.7% of the Columbia College students voting said they favored divestment. This evening's event is not part of any formal Columbia University consideration of the issue, but we felt it would assist those who make the decisions on the future investment policies here and at other nonprofit institutions, and those who are engaged in advocacy on all sides of the issue, to hear from a panel of leading experts on socially responsible investing. All of our speakers have many years' experience in the worlds of investments, nonprofit management, or both, and they bring sharply diverging views on these issues. The format this evening is that I'll introduce each speaker before he or she speaks. Each panelist will have 15 minutes. When we're all done, I'll ask them a few questions, and then I'll open it up to questions from the audience. We will adjourn at 9 p.m. By the time we're done, I hope that everyone in this room will have a better understanding of the competing considerations involved in this issue and will better be able to form their own judgments based on the facts and analysis that we hear tonight. So that those who are not present can benefit from the discussion. The program is being videotaped, and we'll post a video on the website of the Sabin Center for Climate Change Law. And since there's some people standing in the back, I'll point out that there are a number of open seats in front here, and if you sit here, I promise not to call on you. And I should also tell you that we have no control over the level of heat in the room, so we cannot reduce the fossil fuel consumption in that respect. Our first speaker is Stephen Heinz. He's the president of the Rockefeller Brothers Fund, which received a lot of attention in September when it announced that it was going to divest from certain energy stocks. Before joining the Rockefeller Brothers Fund, Mr. Heinz held top leadership positions in both the nonprofit and public sectors. Most recently, he was founding president of DEMOS, a network for ideas and action, a public policy research and advocacy organization working to enhance the vitality of American democracy and promote more broadly shared prosperity. Prior to founding DEMOS, he served as executive vice president and chief operating officer of the East-West Institute, where he worked on issues of economic reform, civil society development and international security. He was based in Prague in the Czech Republic from 1990 through 1997, working extensively throughout Central and Eastern Europe and the new independent states. He devoted the first 15 years of his career to politics and government service in the state of Connecticut, and has been active in many other issues over many years, and we're very pleased to have Stephen Heinz with us.
Is that going to work? Can you hear me reasonably well? Great. Well, Michael, thank you very much for the invitation to be with this wonderful panel of people who are a lot smarter on this issue than I am. And I'm really looking forward to the discussion and the debate that we may have. And I'm delighted to see all of you here, students, faculty, other members of the Columbia community, the president of the university, and others in the general public. This is an extremely important issue, not the divestment issue per se, but the larger question it seeks to help address, which is, of course, the future of our planet. And I'm going to just kind of tell you the story of how the Rockefeller Brothers Fund came to the decision that Michael referred to, the decision to divest, and tell you how we're doing it, because it was not a simple decision, and the implementation is not a simple matter. And I think any of us who believe in divestment have a responsibility to really talk about the complexities and to educate each other, to learn from each other as we go down this path. This is not a rhetorical exercise. This is about investment reality. So let me just tell you a little bit of our story, and I'm going to try to do this very briefly, and then I'm really looking forward to the other presentations in our debate tonight. So to set the context for our own decision, the Rockefeller Brothers Fund is a foundation created by the third generation of the Rockefeller family in 1940. So David Rockefeller, who at age 99 is the surviving brother of the Rockefeller brothers, and his four older brothers created this institution to carry on the family's philanthropic traditions, but in their own way. And it has evolved over the years, but from the very beginning, it had a very international perspective, and it was interested in issues of environment, and issues of civic life, and issues of health and education, and arts and culture. We are now focused more narrowly on three themes that we work on here in the United States and in various places around the world. And those themes are democratic practice. We are supporting efforts to try to strengthen the quality of democracy, and much of this is focused on democracy reforms here in the United States, where we clearly have a lot of work to do. We also are interested in democracy as a question of global governance, because many decisions are being made by global actors, some of them multilateral, some of them individual, like global corporations, some of them now global non-state actors. And the decisions that these actors are making have huge implications for the quality of life for billions of people across this planet. And yet our system of trying to manage that and manage global challenges that no single state is capable of addressing is just a patchwork of inefficient, undemocratic, unaccountable institutions, rules, regulations, etc. So bringing democracy to the level of global problem solving is the other part of that portfolio. The largest portfolio is sustainable development. And our sustainable development portfolio today is focused entirely on the generational and existential challenge of climate change. And we are working on policy development and research. We are working on advocacy. We are working to support the movement building that is necessary to advance the public policy agenda that we need if we are going to avoid climate catastrophe later in this century. And the third theme is peace building. And here we are working mostly in the greater Middle East, in Afghanistan and Pakistan, in Israel and Palestine, We have had a long engagement on the U.S.-Iran relationship and the nuclear negotiations. So as you can see, we only work on the easy problems at the RBF. And we work, as I said, here, but we're also doing quite a bit of interesting work on the climate issues, in particular in China. We are working on issues in the Western Balkans, and we have some work that is truly global in nature because of the global governance and because of the climate negotiations. So that's a little bit about who we are. So you might imagine, with that kind of history, a family that has been deeply committed to conservation and the environment, and a foundation that is using its grant making to advance the goals of a sustainable planet, that we would have to ask ourselves the question, what are we doing with the other 95% of our financial assets? Because foundations are required by law to give away 5% each year of their average net asset value, but that leaves the other 95%. In our case, our total assets today are a little under probably $860 million. So we're giving away, a modest amount of about $26, $27 million. Some years it's been 30 or 33, depending on how much funding we have. And all those other assets are sitting there, invested and making money, we hope, because that's how we continue to operate for all these years, now almost 75 years. And our goal is to manage all of this in a way that creates the potential that this foundation would be able to operate more or less in perpetuity, so that future generations would have resources to address the philanthropic challenges of their time, just as the current generation is doing. So we began this quest to figure out how could we use more of our assets to advance the programmatic goals and the mission of the Rockefeller Brothers Fund. And this led us in the beginning, and this was back in 2003 and 2004, to think about becoming, as the first way of engaging, active shareholders. Because we saw our voting rights as shareholders as economic assets themselves, and we felt that responsible fiduciary behavior and good stewardship of those assets required us to vote them in ways that we felt were consistent with our values and with our mission. And so we worked for a year with our investment committee, which is a committee of very highly successful Wall Street investors and others. And we worked for a year to develop a set of proxy voting guidelines, which came to 32 pages in the end, very detailed. And we started instructing our managers to vote proxies in accordance with those guidelines. That process was our first step into the process of mission-aligned investing. That went on for a couple of years and got interrupted by a change in management, because we concluded that with a portfolio of our size and complexity, we shouldn't be managing this investment responsibility in-house with a volunteer committee, that was not a reliable way of meeting one's fiduciary responsibilities. And so we weren't big enough to go out and hire a top Wall Street chief investment officer either. So we looked at firms that provide CIO services on an outsourced basis to endowments, mostly colleges and universities and some foundations. And we hired a firm that had an excellent track record and had about 10 or 12 other clients in the endowment world. And we went off to work with them, fully discussing with them at the outset our interest in increasing the mission-aligned dimension of our investing. But over those years, from 2007 until 2013, we came to the conclusion that the business model of that firm, successful as it was in producing good returns overall, was not flexible enough to allow one client, like the Rockefeller Brothers Fund, to have separately managed accounts through which we could begin to express our sustainable investing goals. And so that led to a very amicable divorce, which was itself a complex process. I won't get into the details unless you want to ask me about them. And then we set out an RFP, very explicitly re-articulating our goals for sustainable investing, ended up with 13 proposals, hired a firm called Perella Weinberg Partners, and they came on board at the beginning of this year. I give you all of that because we had to do that. We had to have the right structure of management with the ability to have a customized portfolio in order to begin to carry out our mission-related investing aspirations. So as soon as Perella Weinberg was on board, and as soon as they had managed the complex process of getting funds out of the previous management and putting funds in to the funds that they wanted to invest, we started talking to them about divestment and investment. Because in 2010, we asked our board to approve a policy to say that we would take up to 10% of the assets and start investing them in ways that were promoting the goals of our mission and programs. And so we started looking for sustainable investments, and we are moving up that ladder, but that too was slowed down by the management challenge. So when we started talking to Perella Weinberg this February about divestment, and with our investment committee, we had a lot of work to do, because as you will hear from some of the other members of this panel, it's a tough case. It's hard work. But we decided to do it for two principal reasons. One, the moral reason, which for us is very important. We are a values-based institution. We are an institution with very explicit mission and programmatic goals that have to do with sustainable development and from avoiding a climate catastrophe that is some decades away, but not much further than that. We also are doing it for economic reasons, because we've become convinced that there is a strong economic case to be made that further investments in the fossil fuel industry are bad investments, and that over time they will be delivering lesser and lesser returns. Others will begin to see them as bad investments, and the market value of those investments is going to shrink, because around 60 to 80% of all the known fossil fuel reserves that are owned by the major energy companies today simply have to stay in the ground if we are going to keep this planet from warming up to 2 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. So that means all of that oil and gas and coal that is in the ground, most of it has to stay there, because otherwise there's no path to a sustainable planet. And we will see in the lifetime of our children major disruptions to this planet, threats to millions of species, including the human species. So we see this as both a moral imperative, because this is close to our central purpose as an institution, but we see it as an economic imperative too, because out in the future there are going to be more and more really exciting opportunities to invest in the alternative energy system that the planet simply has to move to. So part of the challenge here is that most of the projections investment professionals make are based on past performance, although they always tell you that you can't hold them to their past performance when looking to the future. Nevertheless, when they want to talk about energy, they always look at past performance, and they take less account of what may happen, what has to happen in the future. And just the decision that the United States and China reached 2 weeks ago, which is a huge landmark, even though those of us who are really environmental activists may feel accurately, in my own view, that it doesn't go quite far enough, but it's still a huge deal. And when China commits to making 20% of its entire energy needs, meeting those needs through non-fossil fuels by 2030, that's going to open up huge investments. Now, whether they'll be open to, us and others to invest in is a big question. So I want to say that we're not alone in this. There are now a number of institutions, other foundations, universities, other institutional investors, NGOs, some local governments that are joining in this divestment movement. But it is not easy, and we are going to take our time in this process to do it right, to demonstrate that you can divest and still meet your other economic and financial goals, which in our case is to maintain the purchasing power parity of the value of our current assets. So, the governor of the Bank of England has now come on this bandwagon and talks about the stranded assets of fossil fuels. Just last week, the former CEO of British Petroleum, Lord Brown, talked about the existential threat to the fossil fuel industry posed by climate change. So I think this movement is gaining strength, and that's what makes divestment important. It's not that our $850 million being divested over the next 4 or 5 years is enough to change any, behavior in one single company or any of the companies we may have been invested in. But it's the momentum behind the concept that is opening up space for another dimension of the climate debate. And that in itself is important, because if you start debating it in investment committees, and you start debating it in investment firms, and you start debating it in energy companies, as well as on college campuses and in other communities, this adds to the public discourse, it adds to the public pressure, it adds to the community of people who are worried about this planet and thinking about ways to move forward. And I will close just with this, that on September the 21st, I think it was, probably a number of you in this room joined with 400,000 other planetary citizens and marched through the streets of New York. I was there with my wife and 13-year-old son, and I have to tell you, I was terribly moved by it. It was an extraordinary collective expression of love for this planet and a collective demand for action. And all of us have to think about what actions are available to us to take to help end this crisis. And one of the actions endowments can take is to begin the process of divesting and begin the process of investing in the clean energy economy that is going to save this planet and provide jobs and prosperity in the century ahead. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Christiana Wood. She has over 30 years of experience managing institutional capital on a global basis in traditional and alternative asset classes. Currently, she's chairman of the board of the Global Reporting Initiative based in the Netherlands, the leading standard setter for global sustainable reporting standards. Previously, Ms. Wood was the CEO of Capital Z Asset Management, the largest dedicated sponsor of hedge funds, having sponsored 17 hedge funds totaling almost $7 billion. She was also the senior investment officer for the Global Equity Unit of the California Public Employees Retirement System, CalPERS, where she was responsible for over $150 billion in equity, bond, and alternative assets. Ms. Wood has an MBA in finance from NYU, a BA in economics cum laude from Vassar, and she is a chartered financial analyst and a chartered alternative investment analyst. She's also on the boards of H&R Block Corporation and the International Securities Exchange. She's an independent director of Grange Insurance and the Merger Fund. She is a trustee of Vassar College, where she serves on the Investment, Audit, Budget, and Finance Committees and is chair of the Vassar College Trustee Investor Responsibility Committee. So, welcome.
Can everyone hear me all right? Okay, good. Well, first of all, thank you for that very complete introduction, and it's a pleasure to be here. I first want to say that I want to thank our host, Columbia Law School, and also Michael for inviting me to participate on this panel, whether or not universities and pension funds should divest from fossil fuels. And I know the time is short, so let me get right to the point. Absolutely not. Pension funds and universities should not divest. And I say this with an open acknowledgement that I hear the call for action on climate change, and I'm a believer that we must act. And we must act soon and decisively and collectively as a global community and as a passionate society that cares about the future of humankind, the planet, and the quality of life as we know it. So in the brief time, I'd like to talk about exactly 10 reasons, only 10, actually there are many more, reasons not to divest. And I say this as someone who has managed a lot of institutional capital, obviously at CalPERS, who's on the board of an endowment and a foundation and a securities exchange, and someone who has the perspective of the sustainability world, chairing the Global Reporting Initiative. So given this limitation, I will start with number one. First of all, the notion that divestment is effective ignores historical fact. Many seem to have romanticized and glamorized divestment as the precipitating event that ended apartheid. This ignores historical fact, and in truth, the truth of the matter is that it wasn't until governments got involved and pressure was truly applied from governments that apartheid was actually ended in South Africa. Recall that the United Nations General Assembly had denounced apartheid in 1973. In 1976, the UN Security Council voted to impose mandatory embargo on the sale of arms to South Africa. In 1985, the United Kingdom and the United States imposed economic sanctions on the country. Small governments, such as the state of Texas, said it wouldn't buy textbooks from companies doing business in South